One of the hardest parts about buying a business isn't, just finding the deal. It's actually getting approved for the financing. And the reason why the financing has been so difficult is because the economy still hasn't improved since the dot com and housing bubbles. In the early 2000s, the banks were just giving money away freely to tech companies just because they had a cool domain name. It was like the hot new thing. And they were just printing and lending money to opportunities that didn't make sense. And then that bubble bursted. And the way they wanted to make up for it, it was to lend to people that couldn't afford to pay their mortgages. Their thought was, all right, we're going to lend money to people to buy these homes. We're going to let them live the American dream. And if they default on their loan, then at least we'll take their house. And then the house is always going to be worth more than the loan. And then we're going to make money. The problem is in 2008, the housing bubble bursted and the value decreased. And now there was like all this money lent out and people can afford to survive, right? The banks failed because they were giving so much money away. And ever since then, the economy still hasn't improved. It's like literally impacted the entire global infrastructure. And ever since then, getting financing from the banks has been harder than ever before. And so this is a huge problem and flaw, but it's also an opportunity because like we're currently now in 2024 experiencing the greatest transfer of wealth in human history because all the baby boomers are retiring and there's a huge demand for acquisition financing. The problem is the banks are still reeling from the mistakes that they made 20 years ago. And so that's why it's so hard for you, the individual buyer, to get approved. So a lot of people try to go through SBA and they ask you to personally guarantee all of your assets, your home, your kidney, I've heard sometimes. And it's the SBA is great, but it's like a lengthy process because they're very strict and they're doing a lot of due diligence because they don't want to lose money anymore. Right? The government already bailed out a bunch of banks and they needed to do a good job with the money. And so that's why now the big opportunity, if you're an individual business buyer, is to not have to only rely on government bank, but to also be able to work with private family offices and hedge funds that lend to financing because these groups are much less strict in regards to like what they approve and they move a lot faster. Now the problem is finding these private family offices are extremely difficult. They typically only work within a tight knit network because that's how they want to lend the money out faster, but they have to trust you, right? And so they're not going to trust you if you're not in the network. And the only really way to get in the network is to pay for it. And that's the advantage that we Acquisition Network have for our clients is we've paid for multiple networks. We've worked with really high level people. We've hired them and we've been brought into communities that we otherwise wouldn't have access to. So that's why the individual buyer, unless you've been spending 60,000 a month over the last 2 years, it's going to be really hard for you to have access to these lending options that we do because we've been making these investments. We've been kissing the hands, shaking babies, you know, or sorry, shaking babies, kissing. Yeah, all right. You know what I mean. We've been getting into the rooms of the people that want to do the financing. And so that's why we're building a platform that aggregates the deal flow. But most importantly, what these family offices want is they want credit worthy buyers. They want people that are qualified, that have good credit, they have cash flow, they have financing, they have a career, because then they can lend their money out, they can make an interest on their capital, they can make a safe bet into a cash flowing business with a good operator, and everyone gets to win. And so that's why these family offices are welcoming the acquisition network in because we're not an individual buyer. They don't have to bet on one person's resume. They can bet on the resumes of everyone on my team who has really strong credentials. And then when we bring in our client, it looks really good. And so when we bring in 40 clients, it looks even better. And when we can show a system, this is how we can scale it to 400 clients. That's why these private family offices, these bankers want to work with us. And so that's how you the individual business buyer can get over one of the hardest parts of actually acquiring a business is getting approved for the financing. You work with a buying group like us that has made the investments, that has the pipeline, that has the vested interest in your success, and we walk you through the entire process. So when your deal gets done, we all get to win. The lender gets to make a return on their money. You get the business that you want, and then we get a piece of the equity. We get the case study, and then we're able to do it again.